All right, so hi everyone. My name is Haytham Elhawary. I'm the CEO and the co-founder of a company called Kinetic. I'm going to first tell you a little bit about myself, my background, and then I'm going to dive into what the company does and some of the challenges we've had deploying wearables basically into industrial environments. So I'm a mechanical engineer. I actually studied in Spain, so I have an undergraduate from a city called San Sebastian, which I don't know if any of you have been to, but it's really beautiful, although it rains a lot. And I also have a PhD in medical robots, and I don't know if you remember, like a while ago there was this internet memes where it's like what I do, what my friends think I do, what my mom thinks I do, you know, all that sort of stuff. So when I got into this PhD, I thought I was going to be working on things like this, like state-of-the-art robots and all that sort of things, and instead, my supervisor gave me this image over here, which is a picture of the male reproductive system, and he said, I want you to build a robot that can put a needle inside a prostate. So for those of you who don't know, the prostate is this little organ in the middle, and I was like, well, how would I even do that? So apparently you do that by building a robot that goes up your bum and access the prostate that way. And so I spent 3.5 years of my life doing that, which I never imagined I ever would. And it sort of made parties interesting because when people asked me what I did, I was like, well, what level of detail do you actually want to know? So to make it harder, we put this robot in an MRI scanner, and we actually tried it on 3 different humans. So we tried this on 3 patients. And so I just wanted to make you realize what that means. So a grad student wrote code for a robot that shoved needles inside the prostate of a real human being. So I was petrified before every single one of those operations, but luckily nothing bad happened. So that was my PhD. I then came to the US, and I thought I was sort of going to be a sort of stodgy professor, or wanted to be a stodgy professor, and then I realized that my frustration with academia was that every time I built something, it would never reach market. It would just be a paper. And so I got pretty frustrated, left, started working for a medical device company, and realized that if you want to get a product to market, don't work for a medical device company because it takes forever. And so that's when I decided to start my own company, and that's what Kinetic is. And so I'll tell you a little bit about that. So what we realized a few years ago is that industrial operations are getting increasingly complex. And so what that means is that you have warehouses that look a lot like this, that have thousands upon thousands of items. You know, take Amazon, for instance. They have robots that are moving shelves around, and they have people that are picking items from these shelves. And you can see in that image, there's like robots that are literally in a queue, in a line, waiting for this guy to pick that item. That robot will get out of the way, and the next one comes on. So, you know, industrial operations are really eking out every last little bit of productivity they possibly can with very, very complex operations. And yet, what we realize is that the technology that keeps workers safe hasn't changed in decades. So there's literally nothing more depressing than going to an industrial safety trade show. Because what you see is, so take this average worker, you see like hard hats. They're selling hard hats still, which were came in vogue in the 1930s. Safety vests, 1960s. You literally go to conferences and there's people selling safety vests still. Steel cap boots, really important, 1980s, state of the art. You have ear protection, eye protection, gloves, signage. So I don't know if you've ever been to a warehouse or a factory, but you always see signs like, be safe, like that's really gonna do something. So safety is really like it's a century old like stuff that's been around that hasn't really changed very much. And so, if you looked at this from the outside, you'd say, well, if it hasn't changed very much, it's probably because it's not really a problem. And then when you sort of dig in the numbers, if you look at this chart on the right, what you see is that injuries cost companies $60 billion a year, which is sort of crazy when you think about it. It affects millions of people, which is the sort of human side of this. And 25% of those injuries are related to people moving stuff around, right? And that's because we have a lifestyle that's based on e-commerce, last mile delivery, and sort of global supply chains, which means you have to move all of this material around to get them into stores or to get them into your houses. So we decided to focus on this problem, which is sort of the lifting injuries. And we did this for a number of reasons, because it's the biggest, but also I have a personal story. Like my mom is a nurse, and I grew up with her busting her back most of her life. And so I sort of felt what it's like to grow up with a family member that, is in the hospital or, with chronic back pain. And so that was sort of what affected me. And so we put together a team, and the funny thing about this team is we have sort of interesting backgrounds, but the most relevant thing in everyone's background for this company was this product. So my co-founder, the CTO of the company, he built a product which solved his very own problem, which was he wanted to run and read on a treadmill. And he couldn't because he would get like dizzy. And so he built this wearable that would go on his sweatband and would sort of measure how his head is moving, and then would move the text on his tablet in the same way. And so he could sort of run and see the text, and he wouldn't get dizzy anymore. And so he built that. I thought it was hilarious. But we actually ended up using much of the fundamentals that are in this product in what we eventually built. So what did we build? I'm going to tell you a little bit about the product, not too much, but I want to go into sort of the challenges we've had over time. So we built this device over here. So it looks like a pager. So it looks like we're bringing sort of pages back. It goes onto your hip. And through a bunch of algorithms, we can infer full body biomechanics just based on your hip motion. So I'm not sure if you're fans of Shakira, but she has a song that says that hips don't lie, and actually it's very true. So your hips, the way your hips move are very indicative of what the rest of your body is doing. So based on that, we can infer your full body biomechanics. We can figure out if you're moving in a way that puts a lot of strain on your lower back, and then we can tell the worker. So we can buzz, we can count how many times the workers are doing it, we can inform management of who are the highest risk workers or who are the jobs with the highest risk. And so through a dashboard and through the device, we can lower your chances of getting hurt by improving the way you move. So that's the sort of fundamental of how the product works. And these are sort of the motions that lead to most injuries, back injuries, so bending and twisting. So you can see the different motions, and the device is capable of detecting those motions and then responding to it in the right way. And I just sort of want to show you what this looks like in the field. So typically, we will deploy this to a bunch of industrial workers, and in this case, it was a company that does last mile delivery. So they're drivers who are going to Manhattan, stopping at 50 different locations and deploying soda to all these different stores. And so what you can see here on the graph is that when they start using our product, they started where the dotted line is at 120 high-risk postures a day. As they start using our product and engaging with it and responding to the feedback, you can start to see how it drops. So that by the end of it, they had reduced the number of their high-risk postures by almost 60%. So by changing the way they move, we're hopefully going to change the incidence of injury for this population, right? So that's really like what the product does. And at this point, we have about 3,500 of these units out in the field. We have a whole bunch of manufacturers. We have a lot of last mile delivery, logistics, warehousing. Those tend to be the industries that have adopted our technology. So that's what our company does. So now I want to sort of tell you what our biggest challenges are. So what I didn't tell you is that I founded this company with my co-founder about 3.5 years ago. So it's taken us 3.5 years to get to this point because we've had a ton of challenges sort of building a product that industrial workers are willing to wear. So the first challenge is that getting an industrial worker to wear anything is really, really hard. And it's hard for several reasons, but think of it as like a three-dimensional problem, right? You have to make a device that is comfortable and seamless to wear, so you basically don't notice it. You have to make a device that they want to wear, so that you can't rely on them being forced to wear it, so that you have to make it desirable. And then you have to overcome like big brother trust issues, right? And so these are the three like big things that we had to overcome just to get someone to wear this. Before we even like talk about how do you change the way they move, right? So I'll sort of walk you through how we did this. So how do you make a wearable comfortable, right? So, we're all engineers on the team, and so we sat down and said, okay, mathematically, how many sensors do we need on the body to sort of estimate full body biomechanics to enough of a degree of accuracy to know if they're moving incorrectly? And so we thought, okay, we'd have a wrist unit, and then we would have a unit that goes on the lower back on a back brace, because I assume that most people are wearing back braces. And so we built a device that sort of looks a bit like this. So the sensor on the wrist, sensor on the back, it can measure angles of motion, it can measure changes in height, it can measure twists of the spine, all sorts of really great things. So we were like super psyched when we built this because we were like, this is amazing. And then we put it on people. These were very early prototypes, and the universal thing was like, this sucks, I don't want to wear it. And mostly it's because they didn't like wearing a wristband, surprisingly. And then the back brace, it's very interesting. Like, most people hate wearing back braces, and they get sweaty and they get gross, and like, who's going to clean it? Like, they're not going to clean it. Is their manager going to clean it? So you have all these logistic issues around we never even thought of. Like, okay, if something gets sweaty, like, who's going to like make it hygienic again? So no one wanted to wear it. So we're like, okay, this is another guy wearing it. So then we took some inspiration from like the GoPro like chest straps, and we're like, you know, if we made this look a bit like a gun belt, so it's sort of really cool, they're probably more likely to wear it. You know, we can make it out of sort of plastic so it doesn't get too sweaty. And we sort of did that. This is my co-founder like fixing some stuff. And, you know, initially people were okay with it, and they started referring to it as a bra, which is never good. And so ultimately people didn't want to wear it either. And so we got to the point where we had to build this. And so again, like, it's a much simpler device. People are willing to wear it. It doesn't get sweaty or gross. But then the difficulty here was, how do we build algorithms that can figure out your whole body biomechanics just based on hip motion? So we managed to solve that, but it just took us a long time to get to the point where people are like, find it comfortable. And now, like, people forget about it. They forget they're wearing it. So that's one part covered, right? But there's still another two parts to this problem. How do you make a wearable desirable, right? So initially we thought, oh, you know, managers will tell workers, hey, you have to wear it just like you wear a hard hat, and then the workers will just wear it. But actually that's not true. And even though managers were saying, hey, you have to wear this, we've made an investment, for the workers, like, they're like, well, you know, if they didn't wear it, managers weren't willing to go to the effort to force compliance. And so we couldn't rely on that. And so we had to make the device in a way like something they wanted to wear. And workers, the one thing we realize is sort of a bit like your smartphone, right? Like, you're willing to wear something that sort of tracks you as long as you get value out of it. And so we realized we had to provide value to the individual worker above and beyond what the company receives, right? And that's really important. And so we ended up putting things like assigning them a goal every day so they would find it fun, and they would compete against their colleagues. We put a step counter, which has nothing to do with safety, but they found it interesting. We put the time on the device, and they thought, this is awesome because I don't have a watch when I come in, and I can tell the time. And so things like that you'd never think were important actually became important just because it made it become a device they were willing to wear. And then trust issues. So, you know, like, when you ask someone to wear this, especially depending on the culture at the company, they can feel it's like Big Brother. And there was a whole bunch of articles that came out of like, hey, you know, companies are tracking their workers, and there's this general like idea that what are you giving me, this connected device? Like, what can it do? Are you going to track when I go on break? And so we have to overcome those issues. Basically we go in and we tell them, hey, it doesn't have a GPS, it doesn't have a microphone, it doesn't have a camera. We ask the managers, tell the workers there's no disciplinary action related to this. This is purely for their own safety. And so by doing that, you can sort of overcome some of those barriers, but it's still very, very hard. So the second challenge that we found is, how do you go from pilot to purchase? Like, most large companies are willing to do a pilot, everyone pilots. But how do you actually get them to buy a meaningful amount? And so we found like a couple of rules. One is you have to be brutal qualifying your customers. So in general, we assume that we're not going to work with them unless they convince us otherwise. So we ask them, what is your safety culture like? Have you spent money on this problem before? Have you shown me other safety programs you've rolled out and spent serious money on? And so if we get good responses for that, we'll work with them. And then the last point is really important, is that we're trying to demonstrate we can reduce injuries, so we have to build that return on investment case, because you will never get anyone to spend a serious amount of money unless you have built a return on investment case that they can use to justify the expense to their bosses. And then the challenge 3 is sort of be paranoid about your hardware. So we do all sorts of crazy things to make sure that hardware it works well. So you can't have a 5% fail rate in enterprise, right? If you send 1,000 units to a customer and 50 don't work, they're going to send it back to you, right? And so we do all sorts of crazy things. We take samples of our product in the field, and we ask customers to return it to us so we can check how they're aging. And we've had many issues with batteries that I'm running out of time, so I won't go into, but batteries are if you've seen a lithium-ion battery explode, it's the end of your company if it happens on a worker, so we take a lot of precaution on that. And then the last thing I sort of wanted to I guess, end on, because I'm running out of time, is just sort of an ode to the industrial worker, because we've seen folks like industrial workers that go around Manhattan delivering items to your stores. They put in 13, 14-hour days in the heat that you have outside. It is brutal. We've been at a site where workers are literally picking up one item every 10 seconds, and that's their job. So just imagine picking up a box every 10 seconds for an 8-hour day. And so I think we take for granted sort of the lifestyle that we have, but behind it is a ton of physical labor that is almost unsustainable. And so I want to end with a little pitch, which is like, if you want to actually work on these type of problems, then come see me because we're hiring as well. So thank you very much.
Very, very cool, thank you. Just one question from me, and then again, for anybody who's new here, we have this delightful little box that we can throw around, which actually is a microphone.
That's cool.
That's our attempt at cool hardware. How do you, so especially for a product that is, where precisely you cannot have something that doesn't work, how do you get to an MVP? I mean, can you have an MVP?
I think you can, because I always even think of this as an MVP because it has some stuff that, like, it's super expensive to build, right? It is completely overspec'd because we didn't know where we're going to end up and what problem we're going to end up solving. So I think you can do MVPs with customers that buy into your vision and are small, and whether you mess up doesn't really matter for your business, right? And so we found a bunch of small companies that were willing to try this out with us. And we would give them units, and they were happy with that. And so we did a lot of our problem finding with that before we would ever go to a big company and deploy it there.
And in a world where, or at a moment in the life of the company where you are capital constrained, so especially in the beginning before you raised your round, did you decide to build most of it internally? Did you work with partners who could accelerate certain parts?
So actually, we built everything internally just because of the makeup of the team. So like our team, what we lacked in sort of sales, we had in engineers. And so we would build everything ourselves. And so we were very good at sort of prototyping and hacking together stuff that we could then test pretty quickly. So for the most part, we did everything ourselves.
All right, and last question from me. I mean, especially as a team of engineers, how did you do those first few sales? Did you put a different hat on and improvised as a salesperson?
Yeah, so at the beginning, I was doing most of the sales as we're probably one of the only engineers on the team that can maybe talk to people. I went out and tried to do sales, and it's amazing. At the beginning, you understand, we weren't, I think what I managed to do was to sort of get a foot in the door and get pilots, but I was very bad at closing. And I realized sort of the shortcomings there of closing sort of large amounts of deals that were large. So when we finally brought in our 2 sales folks, they've been very good at sort of making sure we have everything in place before we start a pilot, brutally qualifying every client, and then making sure we have everything in place afterwards to try and get a big deal. And that's what I was lacking.
And then just quickly, out of curiosity, what was the profile of those 2 salespeople? That's the usual question in startups, right? Do you find people with deep background in the industry and experience, or did you find sort of young, hungry folks?
Yeah, not at all. So yeah, one was young and hungry, but he actually came from the biomechanics. He was a biomechanics major, and so knew a lot about movement, so was super passionate and had sold medical devices in the past. So what he didn't really have any experience in this field, he brought in passion because he understood the technology. And then the second hire was a closer, because I didn't know that was important at the time. And he just comes from a traditional enterprise sales background.
Great. All right, there's one question here.
Thank you. It was a super interesting one. So with any Haytham analytics essentially how I think about this, you're always going to have some error. How did you guys go about figuring out what the cost to you or your customer of false positive was false negative is? And then what did you do to push the error around?
Yeah, that's a great question because it was totally a problem we had. So to give you an idea, a false positive would mean that the device would buzz to tell you you've done something incorrect, but it would do it wrong. It would do it at the wrong time. And that would drive workers crazy because we would give them goals, we were having them compete, and if this thing goes off, like they stop trusting it, they hate it. So we've optimized completely to reduce false positives. And that comes at the cost of missing some high-risk postures that you do. But honestly, they do so many every day that if you miss 10%, it's not a big deal. But if you buzz when you shouldn't, it's over. And so we've totally optimized for that. It's a good question.
Look at doing it as a direct consumer or targeting the sort of warehouse workers directly, or was it always planned to be enterprise?
Yeah, it was always planned to be enterprise just because it's just an easier sell, right? Like, I mean, it takes a longer amount of time, but the return on investment is sort of clear. Like these large companies are self-insured, so they actually have to pay for all the injuries themselves. So like it's the willingness to pay, and it was a more rational sale as well. It just made it like a no-brainer to do that.
We have time for one more. Is that right? There is one. All right, but it's actually expired, right?
Yeah.
All right, I think that's actually all the time.
Okay. Well, hey, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.